Not wanting to keep everybody here too long this evening, because I do appreciate, and we as the Finance Committee appreciate people coming out to these presentations. But what I want to do first, because it was on somebody's agenda for the evening, is have everybody stand and we'll salute the flag before we get started. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And there are handouts at the front table if people would like to come up and grab some of those. And then just as a way of introduction, the reason why this series of presentations was pulled together was, as a Finance Committee, we find that once we get past the holiday season, we really get down and dirty into the minutia of the lines of the budget. And what we thought would be really helpful for us would be to have some broader context to look at the budget in view of. And we thought it would also be nice for everybody to have an opportunity to hear the same information at the same time and at future meetings, whether they're joint meetings, whether they're just meetings, our own meetings, to be able to discuss some of the data as it relates to the types of things that we're trying to do. So that was basically where we came up with the notion of we'd like to pull this kind of a thing together. We did approach Adam Bernie, Heather Lemieux, and Kate Burnham to come and present an overview of what's been going on in the town. Where was the town 10 years ago? Where is it now? What do they see going forward as some of the needs and the challenges and the strengths of the town? And they were willing to put that together. It doesn't feel like it was a rush, but I'm sure it was a rush because it basically comes at the busiest time of year for everybody. And I'm mostly just grateful that they were willing to put this together. The way this evening will go is I'm going to turn it over to the presenters. They're just going to go, and they'll, starting with Adam Bernie, he'll initiate the presentations, and then the other two speakers will follow in turn. At the conclusion of that, we will have questions and answers. We'll start with the committees. Any questions that they might have for more information. We're looking for more information and clarification. We're not looking for discussion at this point. And then once those groups are finished with their questions, we'll open it up to the public for questions. So please note on the handouts, as presenters are going through their presentations, any questions that you might have come up so that you can raise those at the time that we open it up to questions. So, and then after that, we'll just go home, and I think the Bruins are playing tonight. I'm not sure, but I think I heard that somewhere. So if there's any questions on the process, which hopefully that was clear enough, it's just, again, questions that we're looking for so that down the road, if we find that we want to get together as committees and talk about this a little bit more, or again, within our own committees, talk about what we heard, then that's really the point of this, was just to get a broader context that, so we can pull ourselves up out of the pages of the Excel spreadsheets and see a better sense of the town overall. But thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest, and I'll turn it over now.
Good evening. So I'm going to run through some quick population statistics, and then we'll look at some impacts on development. I always have trouble with this microphone, so if you can't hear me, just give a shout. What we have here is just our general population. I know Terry said 10 years. Because the census is decennial, it's easier to go back 20, or else we're dealing with just 2 data points. So we've grown quite a bit over the past few years, significant growth in the past 17 years, about 18.6%. Sure. Yep. All right. No, please, that's fine. So, again, 17 or 18.6% over the past 17 years. And you'll notice that I'm using, for current population, is the 2007 ACS, that stands for American Community Survey. It is a census product. It was developed around 2011. And what it is it's a blended 5-year average of a statistical sample of the community that's extrapolated out to an estimate of. The 2017 5-year estimate has Lunenburg at 11,150 residents. There's a plus or minus of, I think it was 220 within that estimate. And in reality, it's 2019. We've probably grown since then. What you'll also note is these last 3 columns are population projections as put forth by the Regional Planning Agency. And they show us losing close to 8% of our population by next year. So clearly these projections are flawed, and we don't have a good model for population projections for the next 20 years. It's kind of a problem. And what will most likely happen is we'll have to deal with these until the 2020 census numbers come out somewhere in 2022, 2023, when they're finally calculated. I guess the town could undertake another firm performing population projections, but what the cost of that is and what the impact would be, I can't say. One thing to note is that in this time, the majority of the growth was between 2010 and 2017. It ends up being about 61% of the growth over the 17 years. It's about, it was a 10.6% growth over that time period, and about 1,070 people. So, like I said, the 2020 projections clearly aren't showing us what we're going to be looking for in the future. Here's a population breakdown by general age categories, and curiously, our preschool age population has been declining over the past 17 years, while our school age population and our elderly over 65 populations are increasing significantly. So what we're seeing, and I don't know that this is necessarily borne out, and I imagine Dr. Burnham will speak to that a little bit further, in the on-the-ground enrollments over the past couple of years. And again, this is a 2017 number, so 18, 19, those numbers aren't borne out in this, but it is showing us getting older, both in school age and adult populations. Here's a more specific breakdown, and it shows some more interesting details, and it shows even our school age population, the younger children, 5 to 9, are declining, and the older children, 10 to 19, are increasing again significantly. Also, our adult population, our young adults is holding pretty level since 2010. Our middle-aged or so, 35 to 44, is decreasing, but all of our older populations, 45 and up, are increasing with the exception of 55 to 59, where we're seeing a very small decline. I don't know what would account for this, but again, we're dealing with data that's estimated, and it's a couple of years old at this point. The other thing to note is we are getting more diverse. So again, still vast majority of white residents, but our Latinx, our Black and Asian populations are increasing. One thing to note about this, so our Black population has increased 328%, Asian 238%, and Latinx 550%. Now, these are huge percentages, but we're talking about very small numbers. So the other thing to take into account is Latinx is not a racial designation, it is a cultural designation, so that can be broken down into white Latinx and Black Latinx based on heritage. So that has impacts on language and culture more so than maybe racial diversity. And I think that, again, we'll see some of the impact on that in the schools and services as we move forward. New construction, this is something that probably is facilitating the driving of our growth. We had a huge building boom in the early part of the century, early part of the millennia, however you want to call it. We see the dip that everybody saw in the recession, 2007, 2008. One thing to note is between 2010 and 2017, excluding the 2017 data because that wouldn't be reflected in the ACS, we saw 370, multifamily units constructed. That encompasses Emerald Place and the first 4 buildings of Tri-Town Estates. In 2017, what's being reflected here is the 120 units at Whalum Luxury. So it totals 490 multifamily units over that period of time. But what's interesting is this population growth isn't driven by these multifamily units. They certainly contribute. One thing I think we're seeing, and is probably borne out in other ways as well, is as residents age and they downsize homes, they sell homes, they move out of town, they're moving 1 or 2 residents out of houses that are being occupied by younger families, multiple children, adults, in addition to the growing multi-generational households that you see across the state and across the country. Parents moving in with children, children moving in with parents, and bringing their families and having blended households. So that all helps drive this. So we're not seeing a major construction boom outside of multifamily. Our single-family numbers, which is the gray bars, are staying fairly consistent across the board. And we're in the 25 to 35 range annually. Property values. So what we see is this is the average property values for the past 18 years. This is from our assessor and their codification over the years. A big spike in the early part of the century, especially in industrial values, between 2004 and 2006, where we see the big dip from the recession. Industrial facilities haven't recovered as quickly as some of the other. We're seeing higher value in the commercial sectors, and all the residential sectors are starting to climb out. There are some outliers. I mean, we have a couple of condo years where they were very high valued. I can't imagine what would account for such a spike, but we are seeing, we see the decline and we see the property value starting to come out. That accounts for a lot of the tax bill increases. As the house is valued greater, the tax rate increase. If the tax rate stays the same and the house value goes up, tax bill goes up because you're paying on a higher value. Unemployment has been steadily dropping since we've climbed out of the recession. This shows that we have a gainfully employed population or a population that's not looking for employment. So unemployment numbers can be deceptive. I think in our instance, we're in a decent economy and we have a fairly well employed population, but once people stop looking for jobs, they don't get reported as unemployed. All right, now we'll move on to the physical. So this is our zoning map. This is going to drive how development happens going forward. It can be changed at any time. It's remained fairly consistent over the past 20 or so years. The most recent large addition is the Village District in the center of town. It converted a previously residential district and a very small commercial district into a by right mixed-use district. We have a significant area of industrial on the southern Lancaster border, and we have a very small industrial area over on the Leominster and Fitchburg borders. The area on the south is generally owned by a few landowners, large lot landowners who are processing rocks, mostly P.J. Keating. The Powell Stone and Gravel owns some, and there are a couple of individual lot owners. So we have a lot of area, but we don't have a lot of uses down there. They tend to be a fairly monolithic use. The dark yellow and the white are large lot residential areas. The light yellow is, I'll say, small lot. It's a 1 acre zoning. The yellow is 2 acre zoning. And the pinky red areas are our commercial districts, most of which are significantly built out or being used residentially in the case of this area at the corner of Townsend Harbor Road. I think there's one commercial use over there that's within that district, and several uses that have long-term been residential or are commercial just outside of that district. This is our sewer service area map. So the brown area, it's about a third of the town, is the area that is potentially permitted to be sewered. And that depends on a lot of different factors. This area in the south, the industrial area, does have the ability to be sewered, but there is no existing infrastructure, and we'll cover that in a minute. This is both a constraint to development and a potential key to development. So if the town desired to expand its industrial base or commercial base, the sewering of unsewered areas, which are shown here in green, would allow for the potential expansion of certain uses. It constrains growth because we have areas of town that have some soil constraints, so septic systems are a little more difficult, require a larger footprint, and may prohibit some development. My understanding is that when the sewer system was put in, that was intentional, that it was put to areas of environmental concern where septic systems were failing or where sewerage would eliminate potential environmental or health concerns. So you'll see about half of our sewer service area actually has sewers. And what happens is when the sewers are put in, there's a betterment, so there's a cost to the property owner, and oftentimes people are unwilling or unable to pay that or don't want to. Here we have significant wildlife habitats. Again, it's another potential impediment to development or growth. It constrains where you can develop to a certain degree. You'll see these circles, they actually have stars in them. If you look closely, those are certified vernal pools. They require that development be set back a certain footprint from there. The stars without circles are potential vernal pools that could be certified at any time and could be something that constrains development. We have a fair amount of National Heritage Endangered Species priority and estimated habitats. Those are the yellow and orange hashes. So these areas down here, those are areas that they hold habitat for critical species within the area's ecosystem. The pink hash is areas of critical concern, so it encompasses this northwest corner of town and the northeast and the eastern border of town. These areas have environmental quality, uniqueness, and are significant natural and cultural resources. The state regulates them, not that you can't develop on them, but there is a process for going through that. And then we have core habitat, which is the green hash. There's a lot of overlap, and that's on the biomap 2, which is also regulated by the state, and that's habitats for rare, vulnerable, and uncommon mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians. So all of these things have to be moved through a process when someone goes to develop in those areas. So we're not living with a landscape that's you can just go anywhere and develop. There are certain constraints, both environmental and regulatory, which will come up. This is geologic features. So this goes to some of what we were talking about earlier. The red hash and the red blobs are bedrock outcrops and shallow bedrock. These are things that would constrain potential septic development. They may increase the cost of any other development, and in these instances, those parcels may not be developed currently because of cost. Blasting is expensive, rock hammering is expensive, installing utilities in those areas can be expensive. But over time, no one's making new land, so land becomes more valuable and people are willing to invest more to develop. So there's a lot of potential in the future. The brown, these things are thick till. Again, this is an area where percolation tests are going to be on the longer rate. They're going to have a need for larger systems. Not that you can't put a system in or you can't build a house there, but you may see lower volumes of houses due to it. You'll also note that a lot of those areas are around some of the farms that we currently have in town that are currently operating. So land protections, and this is one thing that we talk about a lot, and I think it's an important slide. And you'll notice all of these maps are newly updated. They were done through the open space process by the Open Space Committee. The town owns nearly 2,000 acres of conservation land, and that's all of this light green land. And it's concentrated in certain areas because they tend to be large tracts. The state owns 129 acres almost, and that's this corner up here, which is the state forest. The land trust is the pink, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so there's some land trust land here and down here, and those about 52 acres, and then 66 acres with conservation restrictions is the green hash, and the brown hash here is the APR land. So all of those lands are permanently protected. They'll never be constructed on. Well, I shouldn't say never. The town isn't going to give up conservation land, and if they do and they want to build on it, there's a legislative process. So can it be done? Yes. It's not a simple thing, and it would require a significant move by the town and a significant move by the legislature. So they're considered permanently protected. APR will always be agricultural land. Conservation restrictions are in perpetuity, and they have a land with them, and the state isn't big on turning over land. Limited protections, there's 510 acres of town-owned land for a variety of purposes: town buildings, schools, parks, all other pertinent purposes, and that shows through this map in this greeny orange, this greeny color, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have the 61 land. There's 1,700 acres in the Chapter 61 programs. So that's forestry, which is the brown, 61A, which is ag, which is the orange, and then the cream is the 61B, which is open space. So there's an overlap in this. The 751 acres of APR land is in most instances also registered in 61 because 61 is a tax program, so you can be in both. And it's considered limited protection, and most of the people in this room will know that once someone wants to remove something from 61 and change the use or sell it, the town gets first right of refusal. So the town can pay fair market value for these things, which the town has done in several instances, but is not always a reasonable option or a financially possible option based on the size and the value of those properties. So we do have a fair amount of land that is protected, but there's still a fair amount of land that can be developed. And then this was done about 3 years ago as part of the Devon's Economic Development Analysis, impact analysis. This shows the absolute, or the constraints, the development constraints on land in town. So the gray areas are all developed land. So could people develop those further? Sure, but they're already developed, so we have an idea of what to expect there. The pink, all this pink land has absolute constraints and is undevelopable. It can't be developed. It's either permanently protected, as shown on the last slide, or there's something else about it that prevents it from being constructed. These yellow areas are partial constraints. They have wetlands, rivers, steep slope, other items about them that would potentially limit their developability. And then the green is all the other land that is developable. You see these corridors through here. Generally, those are going to be riverine corridors. There's a 200-foot Rivers Act that would prevent some of the development in those areas. And so we see that while there's a lot of land that's protected and not developable, there's a lot of room still to grow. Again, as I mentioned before, without sewers, with using wells and septic systems, there will be some constraint on the ability to develop some of this green land. But as time goes on, people are willing to invest more to develop more because the land becomes more valuable. And my final slide is this build-out analysis was done in the early part of the century. And this is one big, giant, scary box of numbers. And it's not a reality. What it is they take the previous map or a previous iteration of it, they remove all the lands that have absolute constraint. They look at the town's zoning, how it's zoned, what the lot sizes and requirements are in those zones, where the town can grow, and they extrapolate a series of numbers that if someone built everything that they could possibly conceive of and legally build on those lands, what's the largest thing that we could end up with? So, again, it's out of date, but it's a piece of information that I think is important for people to see and to understand. So it has us gaining about 12,000, 13,000 residents. So using the data from the time, that has us topping out about 22,000 residents. That would put us up about 5,000 from where they are. 5,000 additional residential units. An additional 6,600 or so acres of land developed. Significant impact on a lot of different fronts. Heat from the sun, the removal of vegetation, the increase in stormwater, the production of lawns and roofs and things those might do. An extra 14.5 million square feet of commercial industrial floor area, and additional water demand of over 2 million gallons, split up into just under 1 million of residential and just over 1 million of commercial industrial. Solid waste going up to about 6,000 additional tons per year, and additional roadway miles of 49 roadway miles. So that's more than a 50% increase in the road miles that we have now, should we be built out to our furthest extent. Again, this isn't reality. The town has purchased significant tracts of land since then that have come out of the ability to develop. People are not going to build out every square inch at every moment. We've seen people come in and develop and purposely build larger lots because they want to sell larger houses. They want to attract people who want to buy larger lots. But there's nothing to say that in the future those folks can't go and sell that land and further develop it. So there are things in the future that could limit us to how much we develop. And I think I've gone twice as long as I was supposed to. So I'll stop there.
Good evening. I'm Kate Burnham, the Superintendent of Schools. So we'll start off with some historical context and the trends that we've been seeing over the last many years. I'd like to provide a framework. The schools operate under a lot of mandates from the state. Since 2010, we've seen an increase in mandated data reporting, including student data, employee data, scheduling data, restraint, discipline, and school choice data. We have also seen an increase in what needs to be reported in the end-of-year financial report. We have seen an increased data collection and reporting tied to our grants. We also have seen an increase in the need for security. Additionally, since 2010, we have seen new curriculum standards for English, math, science, social studies, and our English as a second language students. We have also seen a transition to a computer-based assessment, the assessment of our English language learner students, the Access test, and a new computer-based MCAS test. We also saw the introduction of the educator evaluation system, which initially required the district to spend a significant amount of effort to develop district-determined measures that were to be a component of teacher evaluation. That has since ended. However, the evaluation system does require many hours to do it well. We've also seen some shifts in the way accountability is reported, and we've also seen additional requirements for Medicare reimbursement. So all of that has been the backdrop since 2010, and now we have a new Commissioner of Education with a new vision where there should be a little bit less focus on data and reporting, mandates, etc., and more focus on students. So when you look at the trends over the last several years, going back to FY 2006, you see that our English language learners population has increased, our low-income population has increased. We did see a little bit of a spike for students receiving Title I services in FY18. I believe that that was due to the model that they put in place where we had additional tutors before and after school, so we were able to service more children. Our special ed numbers seem to range between 250 students and about 300 students. The percentage of our students receiving special education services has maintained itself in a range from 14% of our student population to where we are currently at about 16%. And we have seen our out-of-district placements that are costly to the district, decline in the last handful of years. We take a look at the number of students on individual education plans. Those are the students who are special education students receiving support, and we can see that we've worked to reduce the numbers there. We've been very attentive to over-identification of students for special needs. And you can see it correlates to a little bit of an increase in the number of students that we're servicing through Section 504. That again is another illegal accommodation that can be provided to students that qualify. We also have been tracking our physical restraints data, and you can see that there's been some effort there to reduce the number of physical restraints for children. So in the top quadrant, you can see the free lunch right next to the reduced lunch, but you can see that those numbers have increased slightly when you look at the combined number. In the upper right hand, you can see the comparison of students coming into Lunenburg as school choice students, and in red you see the number of students who reside in Lunenburg going out of district, and we are looking to compile some data to better understand the nature of why students are choicing out. In the lower left-hand, you can see the total enrollment. Since FY06, it sort of peaked around FY07, and then it started to decline, but you can see in recent years it's starting to increase again. An interesting piece of information here, the affidavit of residency. Our students are eligible to attend Lunenburg Public Schools if their parents own a home in Lunenburg, if they lease an apartment in Lunenburg, or people are moving into Lunenburg and residing with homeowners currently in town. In order for them to register for schools in Lunenburg, they have to produce documentation that verifies that they are actually living with someone who is a homeowner in town. You can see that last benchmark there is 10. That's 10 affidavits of residency as of last week. So that's not the total number for this year, just what we've received so far. But we've been maintaining pretty consistently around the 20 mark for the last number of years. This was a bit of a challenge because we had to go digging into a variety of records, so it may not be 100% accurate, but it's pretty close. So we've watched the staffing trends since FY08. What you can see in red are the number of FTEs, full-time equivalents, that we lost in that particular year. And you can see in the green the full-time equivalents that we gained. So in the teacher category, those numbers are classroom teachers as well as special education teachers. And overall, since 2008, we've been able to recoup positions that were lost, and at this point we are in a positive by 6.7 FTEs. When we look at our paraprofessionals, it looks like we're in a positive 1.8 FTEs, but I would caution you here that the data is not very reliable. For a number of years, the paraprofessionals would be hired on and carried as temporary employees, so they weren't carried in the budget under salaries. These numbers here are reflective of those positions that were in the budget. Support services would be positions like guidance, our behavioral specialists, school psychologists, our social worker. And you can see that over time we've been able to add those much needed positions. However, when you look at the custodial staffing, overall we're still down FTEs. Food service has remained fairly unchanged. We have lost FTEs with our secretarial staff that have not been recouped. And over time, overall we're down in terms of the administration positions that we have. You'll note that there are 2 positions under administration, FY17 and 18. In FY17, we added a food service director. And in FY18, there was an addition of an athletic director / high school dean. That position has since transitioned to a full-time athletic director. So those 2 administrative positions really have nothing to do with the instructional leadership of the district. Looking at our past relative to facilities, in 1997, there was a master plan study, and what came out of that master plan study was a new primary school and an upgrade to the boiler plant at Turkey Hill. In 2007, another master plan and a high school feasibility study resulted in turning over the Passio School and taking down the high school with a replacement of the beautiful building that you're sitting in now. Capacity. So as Adam had referenced, projections, reliable projections are hard to come by. So, you know, we've made our best educated guess, projecting out the next handful of years. And while we expect that we will see some increase to enrollment, we're not seeing anything that would indicate that we should be expecting a large number of students to be arriving in a year or 2 years' time. Of course, that can change. But you can see at this point, the numbers for FY20, the current year, and it still says draft because these are not the official certified numbers, certified for the state data. But right now, we're at 1617 for a total number of students. So class sizes, at the pre-K, naturally those class sizes are smaller. You've got K1 and 2 at the primary school. Your kindergarten classes and second grade classes range from 20 in a class to 23 in your largest class. Your first grade was that very large kindergarten class last year. We saw an increase of 33% in the numbers of students in kindergarten last year as compared to the year prior. So this year's first grade, so those class sizes are larger at 24 to 25 in a classroom. Turkey Hill is, again, at 24 to 25 for grades 3, 4, and 5. The middle school, 6, 7, and 8, are running between 24 and 26 in a classroom. And the high school, these numbers are a bit deceiving, which is why I reported a range here as well. You might have an advanced placement class with 8 students in it. You might have a Spanish class with 28 students in it. So that average class size of 18 to 22 can be a little bit misleading. So I want to make sure that I qualified that there is a range, a rather wide range of numbers per course. When we look at capacity in terms of our cafeteria space, currently we can accommodate in any one lunch session. At the primary school, we can accommodate 164 students. There are currently 3 lunches, 1 for each grade. We do have the space in the cafeteria to add tables, and we could add up to an additional 24 seats. At the Turkey Hill, the cafeteria capacity for one session is 180 students. Again, currently 3 lunches are running, 1 per grade. At the middle high school, the cafeteria capacity indoor is 290 seats. Outdoor, an additional 64 seats. So in good weather, the students typically opt to sit outside. But during inclement weather through the winter months, we can accommodate in any lunch period 290 students. Currently, the middle school is running 2 lunches, 1 for the 6th grade with 141 students if everyone is present in school that day. The other lunch is a combined 7th and 8th grade lunch with 269 students, assuming 100% attendance on that day. And you can see that we still have additional available indoor seats in the cafeteria. Additionally, we have 2 lunch sessions for the high school, and those are mixed depending on student schedules. So what's our classroom capacity look like? So next year for the primary school, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, we're anticipating 6 classes in each of those grades. So a total of 18 classrooms. If we had 25 students per classroom, we would have 450 students. We do have some capacity to make some adjustment to use of space currently in the building to free up classrooms, to add classrooms to the primary school if necessary. And again, keeping a cap of 25 students. And I would not recommend that we exceed that 25 threshold at that grade level. We could accommodate up to 525 students. And we would still be able to have them all in the cafeteria for lunch. Turkey Hill, currently 3 grades, 5 homeroom classes per grade. If there were 25 in each class, we would have 375 students. If we were to repurpose some of the classroom space currently not in use as a classroom at the Turkey Hill, we could go up to 18 classrooms and accommodate 450 students. And if we further restructured the way we're using space, we could potentially have 22 or more classroom spaces to work with at the Turkey Hill. So we do have plenty of room to flex there. At the middle school, 17 classrooms in play. Again, you can see if there were 26 in a classroom and what numbers we can accommodate with 28 in a classroom. And there's no specific classroom capacity listed here for the high school because the nature of the high school is very different. So the middle school students still are assigned to teams on a grade, and that limits the number of teachers that they spend their day with. They travel more as a pod of students, if you will, so we know how many students we can accommodate in a classroom. At the high school, it really is driven by the schedule. You could have 50 freshmen with 50 different schedules for the day. So there's no one fixed way that I can report to you how many students we could have at max capacity per classroom. However, in conversations with the middle high school administration, they feel very confident that without making any major accommodations to the way they are currently using classroom space, that they could support a combined enrollment of 1,000 to 1,050 students here at the middle high school. And with further accommodation, we could support more. As an example, right now you have teachers who are assigned to a classroom. They can occupy that classroom for the day. They can stay in their classroom during their prep period. If need be, they could go to a workroom during their prep period, and we could assign another teacher to teach a class during that period in that classroom. So again, there's room to grow. We can make some adjustments to accommodate. So looking forward, last year I went through an entry process. I presented a report of findings in the spring, and through late spring and summer, I worked with the leadership team to address the findings. We looked at the existing mission that comes from the current district strategic plan. This is the mission statement that we read at the start of all of our school committee meetings now. So the mission of the Lunenburg Public Schools is to provide all students with the skills, confidence, and passion for lifelong learning so that they may find their own paths to successful careers, active citizenship, and rewarding lives. We've tweaked the vision a little bit. We've added a little bit. So the vision now reads, the Lunenburg Public Schools is committed to becoming a leader in education by focusing on its values of attending to the personal well-being of its students, providing high-quality curricula, and student-centered instruction for deeper learning at all levels, and promoting the development of attributes and skills necessary for continuous learning. For the last couple of years, the work of the district has been guided by the district's strategic plan, and that strategic plan had 8 goals, and you can see the goals here. One focused on social emotional learning, another on professional development, civic learning and engagement, curricula and assessments, enrichment opportunities, digital literacy and computer science, support for struggling learners, and collaboration and communication. So, through the work with the leadership team this summer, what has emerged as the next outcropping, if you will, of the process of entry and what we have found and what we are looking to address, we have now created what we're referring to as a strategy for continuous improvement. And we're going to focus on 4 objectives. And these objectives do cross back nicely to the previous 8 goals that were part of the district strategic plan. So we're looking to transform teaching and learning to ensure that teaching and learning are student-centered and inclusive by establishing effective teams of educational leaders to accomplish the essential work for transforming practice, and hiring and developing excellent educators who are continually learning and adapting practice to meet the needs of all students. Cultivating climate and culture. We're going to work to create culture that values data use and fosters continuous learning in a climate that is safe, caring, and inclusive, and reflective of our core values. Communication and operations. We will work to improve operational efficiencies, including communication, in order to increase the organization's capacity to execute the district's mission and vision. And lastly, we're going to look at equity, access, opportunity, and achievement for all students. Here, we're looking to ensure that all students are provided equal access to a high-quality education that is collaborative, interactive, and relevant, with an appropriate level of support and challenge, so that they can become well-rounded, resilient, confident, and capable young adults adequately prepared for future challenges. The entire outline of the strategy, including priority actions under each of these objective areas, is posted on the district website. I think it's important to note that as part of the development of that strategy, we had a theory of action statement. Basically, it's an if-then statement. So the statement reads, if we develop a strong instructional leadership team with the capacity to lead a community of educators committed to continuous learning, approaching teaching and learning with a growth mindset, and developing social emotional learning competencies, and we consistently put the needs of our students first, including through allocation of resources, creation of collaborative and flexible learning environments, and authentic, interactive, relevant, and engaging learning experiences, then our educators will be recognized as leaders in the field, and our students will be self-aware, well-rounded, resilient, passionate, confident, capable, and prepared for future challenges along their paths to successful careers, active citizenship, and rewarding lives. So this is what's going to guide the work of the district moving forward. So looking ahead to staffing needs, given the work that we have just outlined, we look back to the needs that were identified in the budget development process for the current year. Last year, the positions that you see in black were positions that were identified and incorporated in the current budget. Those in red were positions that were identified as an area for need, but were not funded in the budget. And those in the purple were positions that we identified as need, but we indicated that we would look for alternate sources of funding for those positions, and we will be able to fund a literacy coach through our Title I grant monies, assuming that we can find a capable, qualified candidate at this point in the school year, which in itself can be a challenge. If we look at the big picture, what sorts of positions do we need to accomplish all of the work that we have outlined for the district in the years ahead? Currently, we have a director of finance and HR. I see that maybe changing the title down the road to perhaps a director of administration and finance. We currently have a director of special services. I might look to broaden that title to student services. And what you would see under student services would be special education, our English as a second language staff, an early childhood coordinator. The nursing and guidance would also potentially fall under this particular director position. You can see that moving forward, based on current trends of increasing numbers of our students for whom English is not their primary language, it's not their first language, we've added an FTE for the next 5 years. Not sure exactly when that position might be needed, but we're anticipating that it might be needed if the current trend continues. We've also added under special education another school psychologist, another social worker that could support the primary school and the Turkey Hill. We currently have a social worker doing great things to support the students here at the middle high school. Another special education teacher, and another paraprofessional. And those positions would be to provide the behavioral supports that we put in place at the primary school last year that seemed to be actually making a difference for students. We would maintain a director of facilities and grounds, maintenance and custodial staff would fall there. We'd look to maybe modify or re-envision the role of an IT director to a director of instructional technology rather than informational technology. So essentially bumping an existing position up by 0.5. In order to do that, though, we would really need to have a full-time network administrator, which would require, again, an increase of 0.5 FTEs. And we would look down the road to be increasing our technicians and perhaps a technology specialist by 0.5. And it would be very helpful if we actually had someone who could operate the control booth for this auditorium. Currently, the only staff that we have that are able to do that are our IT team, which is very small. You can also see that there's a director of teaching and learning. This would be a curriculum and instruction type position. We currently have department heads. We would look down the road to bring in elementary curriculum coordinators, which would be something akin to department heads, but at the elementary level. We would also be looking to add instructional coaches, 2 at Turkey Hill, 2 at the primary. At each of those schools, 1 would focus on math, 1 would focus on literacy. And we'd also look to bring on an instructional data specialist. We can provide much stronger targeted interventions for students if we have teachers who know how to look at and gather data on individual students, how to interpret that data, and what to do with that information to provide targeted intervention for students. This particular position would also be very helpful for the building principals to have a deeper understanding of their MCAS data for their building so that they can, too, use that data to make decisions and guide the building moving forward. I'd look to put in a director of extended learning programs. Right now, we have our adult learning program. We also have the extended day programs. We have an early learning center. We have Community Links program. I'd like to bring them all together under one umbrella with someone to lead and be the point person, the liaison to me, for all of those different programs. We have a full-time athletic director. Last year, we proposed an athletic trainer position. It ultimately was not funded, but again, we feel it's a need. So we're putting it on a 5-year plan. We also think that we would look to have a field and equipment manager and additional coaches. Again, the coaches, associate coaches were requested last year, not funded. And lastly, we've got our principals. We have 4 principals. Currently, we have 2 assistant principals. There's 1 assistant principal here, split between the middle school and the high school. We have another assistant principal who's split between the Turkey Hill and the primary. With the nature of all of the data collection and reporting that I introduced this presentation with, the demands on the assistant principals are significant, particularly here at the middle high school level. Social media, things are happening on social media, it's brought into the school, it requires an investigation be done. And that's hours of time. And these incidents are frequent. So when we look at a 5-year projection for classroom positions, again, a lot of this is going to be driven by enrollment. With the exception of an additional clerk at the primary school. There's currently a part-time clerk there now, and we would be looking to increase her hours. At the Turkey Hill, we had some conversation as a leadership team about the value of the foreign language program, and if possible, over the next 5 years, we would look to extend that and actually initiate the program with a world cultures study at the Turkey Hill level. At the middle school, we would be looking to restore foreign languages to grades 6 and 7. And at the high school, we've talked about adding American Sign Language as an offering for students. We know through the NEASC accreditation process that we have already been flagged for having not enough support in our library here, since that one library services 2 schools. We would like to have a dedicated technology teacher. A technology teacher could potentially do more in the way of computer science. That was an identified area for growth under the previous district strategic plan. We'd look to increase 1 guidance counselor position. And we would look to institute a student advisory, student activities advisor, somebody that could be the one-point person to coordinate all student activities. I think it's important to point out that we currently have many shared positions across the district. The list here on the right, you've got shared positions at Turkey Hill in the primary school, art, our behavioral specialist, a school psychologist, an assistant principal, and a speech-language pathologist. We have some shared positions district-wide. The district has 1 occupational therapist, 2 teachers that can teach English learners, and we have 1 SRO, a very phenomenal SRO, our school resource officer and his faithful assistant, Hank, who does a phenomenal job trying to visit all of our schools in the course of a week. And then on the left, we have many shared positions at the middle high school. That's the benefit of having one building. So when we talk about future needs, as I said, we really don't have any reliable enrollment projections. And unfortunately for us, we have to teach those students when they arrive. So whether we have anticipated their arrival or not, when they arrive, we have to be prepared to educate them. We're seeing over the last handful of years, with those previous slides, you could see that there's a shifting demographic for our student, and the shift is also being seen in their needs. We have needs for field space on the campus. We do not have any diamond fields. We cannot host our own softball or baseball on the campus. We have to utilize the parks. Pending what is decided with the Passios building, if a renovation project were to proceed, we would then have to be looking for office space and storage space that we currently have at the Passios. We would also be looking for program space for our extended day program, our Community Links program, our ACE program. The Turkey Hill is a decision that the community is going to have to make in the next couple of years. The building is aging, and a decision needs to be made as to whether or not to commit to doing a renovation project to that existing building, or are we doing a replacement, a brand new build, and knocking down the Turkey Hill? So that is dialogue that we will have to be getting to and making some type of a decision in the next couple of years. And lastly, to make these kinds of instructional shifts in the classroom, teachers really do need professional development. They need the support of experts to help them learn new strategies, new techniques, new ways of looking at data to benefit their students. Typically, a consultant is $2,000 a day. And I can tell you that with 1 or 2 days of training, you're not getting much momentum forward. You need to make a commitment. And we would be looking to make a commitment over the next 3 to 5 years to professional development tied to literacy, reading and writing at the primary and the Turkey Hill. Questions? Next up.
So this part of the presentation will focus on a historical look back over the last 20 years, current day operations, and future needs for town departments based on trends that we're seeing right now. So the methodology I used in preparing for this discussion included meeting with the various department heads to discuss trends in their various disciplines and the projected impact on the service that they provide the community. A review of the demographic data as collected and presented by the land use director, certain statistical data collected by the police, fire, library, and council on aging, and a review of how population growth compares to town employee headcount. My presentation includes some charts, but mostly talking points based on my discussions with the department heads. So this bar graph depicts population in relation to the total town employee headcount. In fiscal 2020, or sorry, fiscal 2000, the, skipping ahead. When the population was approximately 9,400, there were a total of 155 town employees. In fiscal 2010, when the population was approximately 10,000, there was a total of 137 town employees, an increase of about 600 residents and a decrease of 18 in headcount. The population in fiscal 2020, according to the town clerk's figures, is 10,800, and the current headcount is 126, which is an increase in about 800 residents and a decrease of another 11 employees in headcount. Without delving much further into the time period from 2000 to 2010 and 2010 to 2020, I believe the Great Recession and the state aid cuts at that time that began in 2008 were a large factor in the decrease in headcount. This is a chart that Police Chief Marino used as part of his budget presentation. It may look familiar to you. As you see from this graph, calls for service, with the exception of a dip in 2015, has steadily increased over the depicted 10-year period. Calls for service is not only affected by growth in our community, but also the surrounding communities of Fitchburg and Leominster. So although calls for service have increased, the department has not grown at the same level. Historically, the police department was never fully staffed, and additional officers was a constant request by that department. We started adding headcount to the police department in fiscal 18, and a formal plan was created by the police chief and during the budget development of fiscal 19, and began a strategic plan of adding one officer a year for 10 years. And this would get the department back to an adequately staffed department in current day population projections. When looking forward, the impact of potential growth and other social trends will impact the police department through an increase in traffic, student population, elderly population, and any growth in businesses will correlate for a need for additional police officer or officers. As the department grows, there will be a need for more supervisors on every shift, an increased need for additional school resource staff at schools as social issues increase, increased need for specialized training for police officers, potential for more incidents such as domestic violence and assaults as the population grows. Regional dispatch will need to grow as towns grow, and we will need to address the increased need for full-time desk officer coverage. And growth will also affect the police department when it comes to capital needs, such as equipment and cruisers. This graph is used by the fire chief to show the types of calls for service, including EMS, medical calls, inspections, and fire calls. Calls have steadily increased over the depicted 20-year period. In fiscal 2000, there was approximately 1,000 calls for service. In fiscal 2010, as the population grew by 600, the calls for service increased by 672. And as Lunenburg's aging population increases, we should see a greater increase in EMS medical service calls. Since fiscal 2000, the department has changed by gaining more full-time firefighter EMTs and increasing station coverage with career and per diem firefighter EMTs from 23.8% in fiscal 2000 to 100% coverage in fiscal 2020. The challenge has been retaining trained EMTs and the dependence on an on-call fire department. When looking forward, population growth, state mandates, and changing demographics impact the fire department. There's a positive correlation between an increase in housing units and an increase in calls. Equipment will see an increase in mileage due to the number of calls, and therefore shortening its lifespan. Training needs have increased due to mandates such as OSHA compliance, EMS training, and hazmat training. And the trend is an aging population with more medically complex problems. The Department of Public Works has undergone substantial changes over the last 20 years. Highway, sewer, parks, cemetery, and facilities was consolidated under the umbrella of DPW in 2001, and this was a significant change to the structure of their overall organization. The 2010 annual report denoted the biggest issue facing the DPW at that time was insufficient funding to address roadway conditions. The pavement management plan debt exclusion in 2016 and plan to earmark $50,000 towards town roads each year has addressed this need. Over the years, responsibilities of the DPW have also increased to include yard waste composting, oversight of the curbside trash and recycling program, oversight of dam safety related to Lake Shirley Dam, and MS4 permit compliance requirements for stormwater. The lack of a long-term plan for the town for certain town buildings has led to deferred maintenance and current condition of those buildings. The following areas are projected to impact the DPW in the long term. Town buildings. An agreed-upon plan is needed for town buildings. As population grows, staffing needs will grow, and we will need additional office space. In regards to roads, an increase in traffic due to population growth will increase the deterioration of the roads, but not if we stick to the pavement management plan. Increase in total miles of road only increases slightly with acceptance of subdivision roads. In relation to stormwater, the MS4 permit requirements are an unfunded mandate on those communities, such as us. An increase in housing equates to more septic systems, an increase in monitoring costs, an increase in stormwater. In regards to yard waste, as the population grows, the use of the yard waste area will be more heavily used. More time will be spent on monitoring, abuse, and brush management of that area. In regards to recreation, additional field space has been identified in the open space plan as a priority need. Current focus is to find better use of the fields and parks. In the future, we'll need to address activity space for an aging population. An increase in programming is related to population growth as well. In sewer, just the question is possible expansion of the sewer service area. Is that possible? In regards to land use, the land use department is organizationally different than it was 20 years ago as well. Planning, conservation, and building were streamlined under land use in 2014, headed by the land use director. The conservation administrator position was created in 2016 to create a position that was not just clerical, but also technical. The building department has fluctuated from having both a building commissioner and a local inspector to currently is just a full-time building commissioner position. When forecasting out on the needs of the land use department and potential impact of population growth on the department, it all boils down to staffing. At some point, we may need another part-time local building inspector, but not in the foreseeable future. The same with a town planner, but not in the foreseeable future. Conservation may need a land management agent for the thousands of acres of conservation land to manage trails, seek grants, manage timber harvesting. And as the population grows, the assumption is more people will use the conservation land. As population grows, it will mean an increase in septic systems, wells, housing inspections, and the Board of Health may need to evaluate the need to have a full-time health agent. This chart that the land use director showed earlier was one that was really eye-opening to me. The population figures show a decrease in school-age children 9 and under, an increase in 10 to 19-year-old students, and an increase in all age groups over 45, with the exception of people aged 55 to 59. The older age group is increasing to around 30% of our population, which is higher than the state average. Our senior center has changed over the years by purposely becoming more of a community center increase programming and outreach to seniors. The Senior Center depends on its many volunteers to help run the center and has only increased incrementally over the years. This information is from the Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative. Massachusetts as a state is getting older, with about 15% being 65 or older, and the older population is more racially and ethnically diverse, has more education, and with higher incomes than previous generations. Globally, people are living longer and birth rates are dropping. In the United States, by 2030, 1 out of 5 people will be 65 or older. According to the Mass Healthy Aging Community Profile, put out by the Mass Healthy Aging Collaborative, in 2018, about 16% of our population was 65 or older. About 6% of that age group was of a race or ethnicity other than white, and 83% had a high school education or greater. The Mass Healthy Aging Collaborative reports on 179 different indicators that demonstrate whether a community has a healthy aging population. In 2018, Lunenburg, compared to state averages, had a number of indicators that were better than state averages, such as lower rates of high cholesterol, depression, anxiety disorders, diabetes, stroke, and others. However, Lunenburg residents had a higher rate of obesity and migraine and other chronic headaches. The map on this slide shows that we got worse in 1 to 5 out of the 179 health indicators from 2015 to 2011, from 2011. Some of the community resources we have in place to promote a healthy aging population include a council on aging, a memory cafe, and wellness programs for seniors. Looking ahead, all indicators show that our aging population will continue to grow. The additional 70 senior housing units at Tri-Town may further increase the percentage of seniors in Lunenburg. Staffing needs will increase as aging population increases, and the need to expand usable space at the senior center, such as finishing the second and third floor areas, may be a greater need. Expansion of outreach services and transportation services to expanded service areas for medical appointments will be a need. With the growth of the Hispanic Latino residents, we may need a Spanish-speaking staff member. And a long-term need has been to address the parking at the senior center, and this will become a greater need as visitors increase to that center. In general, public libraries have changed in the last 20 years in the type of service delivery they provide. Data collected from the American Library Association 2019 report indicates that public libraries are essential to communities and are a source of civic pride. And although traditional library services, such as free access to books and quiet space areas to study, are valued, it's increasingly valued as a community hub. Although circulation trends are down nationwide, our circulation has not shown a significant drop. Electronic circulation has grown steadily. In fiscal 12, the e-content usage was reported at 1,193, and it increased to 16,767 in fiscal 19. People traffic coming into the Lunenburg Public Libraries has remained consistent, and programming has more than doubled since fiscal 12, especially the young adult programming, since hiring a young adult librarian. Looking forward for the library, we should address staffing and space needs as the population grows, and there's a growing need to have outside programming, as the current staff that does the programming is at their capacity, is maxed out for doing programming in-house. There's an increased cost for bringing in outside programming, as it costs more than having someone internally do it. And if circulation materials keep increasing, space needs will be a concern. Expansion of the teen room is needed based on the current usage and overflow of that age group out into the rest of the library. And if staffing does grow, ideally the library would need additional office space. Information technology needs have changed as well over the last 20 years. A technology department was created in 1999, and duties included installations, troubleshooting, maintenance, disposal, and purchasing. Technician staffing has increased incrementally over the last 20 years. As an organization, we are more and more dependent on various software programs to function and deliver services. These streamline processes, further internal communication, and create efficiencies. Today, cybersecurity is a priority, and protection of our data and disaster recovery if we were ever a target. Looking long-term in the near future, we may need to expand our IT staff. Increase in staffing and student population will affect the need for IT support. On the upside, automation and management tools such as automatic installation of patches for our software and other automated processes have decreased the reliance on our IT staff to monitor these softwares. Lunenburg Public Access has been licensed since 2007, and the PAC provides content on government and public channels, and an education channel is expected to be created in fiscal '21. Over time, programming has evolved from entirely all outside sources to mostly locally produced shows. Public Access had a temporary studio in the Brooks House in fiscal '11, but it was not suitable for their long-term needs. A new studio location was created in the TC Passios building in fiscal '13 that included upgrades to that space to allow for improved quality in production and video shoots. In the Town Hall live broadcast control room, upgrades were done in fiscal '15 and '16 to also improve broadcasting and audio. Looking ahead, population growth related to housing units would equate to new subscribers. However, other media centers are experiencing a drop in subscriber fees due to bundled services because overall it's less in fees, and a drop due to increase in streaming services. The FCC ruling would significantly impact the PEG fees the town receives, and regardless of population growth, PAC's long-term goal is to create a professional studio. A new studio is targeted by fiscal '22 or fiscal '23. The goal of purchasing more cameras to correlate with the goal of member-based media center, which would also increase on-air content, is a goal for the future for the PAC. So what patterns do we foresee for the future? Steady growth in our aging population, demographics that show a rise in racial and ethnic diversity, and this growth will trigger the need for additional staff and increased staffing and program usage due to population growth, and we'll have an increased need for office space and program space. So what does this mean for the future of Lunenburg, and how does it impact the services that we are providing to our residents? Projecting future needs becomes problematic when we have no reliable growth predictions. As you heard from the land use director, our regional planning agency's projections that were only done a few years ago are grossly underreported. Unknowns such as the future of the economy and how it will impact the housing market will influence how projects like the development of Howard Street will move forward and create more what-if scenarios. When the next recession hits, our dependence on property taxes will increase as there will be less available funds from the state, local aid to cities and towns, and our elastic revenues such as motor vehicle excise will likely decrease. So that's less available revenues for the town and more dependence on the property tax. The last recession taught us to prepare for economic downturns by increasing our reserves, funding our pension liability, and contributing to our OPEB liability. We must also plan for the future by keeping within our debt limits that the policies we have set for the town, and not deferring maintenance and capital needs. We all wish we had a crystal ball. This part of this presentation, the three of us agreed, was we wish we had a crystal ball to tell you what projections we could, give you tonight for predictions that we really can't know without having good growth patterns. But we can plan for the future by addressing staffing shortages with incremental growth and budgeting that will address the community's needs over the long term with sustainability in mind.
Actually, I just want to start by thanking you very much for all of that information. I'm depressed now. I don't want to be on the Finance Committee anymore, and so there are seats available if anybody's interested. With that, there is, I believe, microphones available on the floor. So, actually, I should have distributed the microphones. Peter, actually, you're close enough. Could you just hand the microphones back to somebody on the Board of Selectmen and somebody on the school committee? Yeah, we just want to be able to hand those down. So actually, I have no questions to start, so I'm going to open it up to, do we have a member of the Finance Committee who has a question? And we have a couple, and Peter happens to be holding the microphone, so if you could just stand up and identify who it is your question is for.
Good evening. First of all, thank you all for putting the time in to put together those presentations. I know that it was a lot of work, and I truly appreciate it. I think that this is something that's been needed for some time to do preceding the budget session or season, and I hope we can do this again in the future. My question is specifically for the land use director, and I understand that while there are demographic and social shifts that you can look at, there are projections that have been made by outside agencies that you've relied upon. I was a bit disappointed not to see some practical views of what we can see as an impact for some things that we can look at on our near-term crystal ball. There's the Howard Street development. There's the court case where we have a property that's for sale on Hollis Hills that has an approved plan for 100 and something units of condos. And there are frameworks that I believe we can rely upon that I think we can begin to project what the growth numbers will look like, both in terms of tax revenue as well as population, and even school-age population. So my first question is, am I wrong about the existence of those capabilities? And if I'm not wrong, would you care to comment on what we could potentially see from those developments and or any other developments that people are starting to sniff around?
So, well, I won't say you're wrong, but I won't say you're completely correct. And I did neglect to include the slide. I pulled the numbers together, and I'm not sure why I didn't get it in there. But I'll start with Hollis Hills. My understanding and position is that project has passed its approval period. It was approved by the SJC in 2016, in late 2016, or in spring of 2016, under the 40B rules and regulations, the comprehensive permit rules and regulations. There's a 3-year life on the approval of those projects. It's now November of 2019. The life of that approval, as I understand it, and as I've had conversations with town council, is that is no longer a valid approval. So I know that it's for sale with the approval. I've spoken to 2 or 3 individuals who are interested in developing that property, stated my position. None of them have come back with any further interest. So again, Could be proven wrong, but my understanding, and this isn't just a hunch, it's been something that I've vetted out. So taking those off the table, the Howard Street project is 122 units. It's intended to be single family. The discussion at the planning board hearing when it was approved was 3 and 4 bedrooms. Also part of the settlement, and which is included in the public record, is the gentleman developing it doesn't actually want to build that. He wants to come back and work with the town to develop something else. So the reality of that being built in the near future, I can't speak to. So yes, there's an approved development there. Yes, there's 122 lots. It's restrained to 25 units per year, so that's a 5-year project. We could use base numbers to develop a potential build out of that. Now, 20% of that is also age restricted, 55 and older, so we get down to about 98 units. We rounded that up to 100, and we figured that if we called it 4 residents per unit, that's 400 additional residents. One would anticipate about half of that being school-age children, so over a 5-year period, there's the potential for, on average, 200 additional school-age children. That's speculation. And I know the population projections are too, but there's a more mathematical formula that gets attached to that. The only other approved development we currently have, the town manager mentioned, is the 70 units at Tri-Town Estates. Those are all 55 and older. They'll be age restricted. They're all 1 bedroom. Of the 70, 62 are 1 bedroom and 8 are 2 bedroom. So, you know, we're probably in the ballpark of 140 maximum residents, and the reality is we're probably closer to about 100. And that's, again, a moving target. And those are probably closer to being constructed. The developer was awarded funding through the state in the summer of this year. So I would expect we would see those come online sometime in the next 18 months.
Next question. And then again, do you want to just identify who it is that you'd like to address your question to?
Yep. Dr. Burnham. Given your analysis of the present facilities that the school has at its disposal for educational purposes, my take is that at present you have sufficient space to, with a little bit of tweak of maybe schedules and use of rooms, that you have enough space for the student body that you have at this point and your staff. Given no major increase or influx of population, do you feel you're sufficient other than renovating and or replacing Turkey Hill and keeping up the present facilities to their present condition? We're in good shape for a few years.
I think the only thing that I would add to that for consideration is that currently the administration offices are at the Passios building. And if we were to be able to realize any of those additional director level type positions over the next 5 years, we would need additional office space. So that is an area of growth that we need to give some consideration to. And I think, you know, the town manager had mentioned that as well, that as staffing needs change and there's more staffing, there is likely additional need for office space for folks. So that would be the only other consideration I think that
Okay,
we need to
unless
be
we got a
talking
major
about.
influx of student body.
Right.
If I could, after making that comment about administrative space, now my understanding is, being on the design committee for the Passios School, that there has been a request for increased space availability for the school district. Did that include some of these needs that you foresee down the road, or is that your present facilities and staffing?
That's, to my understanding, I can verify with Mr. Londa that that's for what we have currently. We've added a secretary to the central office, and we know that we have relocated the extended day programming to the TCP as well. Looking at those staffing projections, it hasn't really been factored into what that space might look like, what the space needs might look like, but that's certainly something that we can look at and bring that information to a future building committee for discussion.
I personally would like to see that information, at least, take a shot at it so
Sure.
that we can consider that when
Yep.
we're looking at the
Will do.
footprint. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anybody? Tom?
First of all, I want to thank, like previous speakers, I want to thank all the speakers tonight. I think this is an excellent thing. I especially want to thank the chair of the Finance Committee, Terry, for putting this together. I think it's really important that we all start from the same baseline going forward into budget season, so thank you. My question is for the town manager and the superintendent. A large portion of the impact of your presentations had to do with staffing, and there was lots of staffing that was on there. So to make it semi-digestible, what would you say the priorities are, the immediate priorities for the next 2 to 3 years? I saw probably in both of the projections, I think in the school projection, there was 21 FTEs, and in the towns, the town manager didn't quantify, but every department talked about staffing needs. If you could talk about the immediate needs, that would be great.
So, yeah, there was no quantifiable number. A lot of departments, it's hard to quantify given at this point in time. So if we were to see large population growth, that's when, obviously, but over time, you'd probably see more just an incremental increase in hours for certain staff, such as, say, the treasurer collector's office. There's room for more hours to be worked by the existing staff. The numbers that we do have for added staff are police and fire. So sticking with the 5-year plan and the 10-year plan for police. So that's an additional about 10 additional headcount.
And I am continuing to work with the leadership team to prioritize the positions that we outlined this evening and which would we need in year 1 versus which could we defer 3-4 years down the road. So I've already started budget development with my team. This is part of that work. So I imagine in about a month and a half's time, we should have those details fine-tuned. Again, for us, shifting need would absolutely have an impact on the layout of the projected positions that we put up tonight. Our priority is always going to be to make sure that we can meet the needs of the students, and as more urgent needs might present themselves that don't exist currently, we're going to have to shift our staffing to meet those needs. But we're working on mapping out a incremental 5-year plan. Thank you.
Katie, I see you have the microphone.
Also for Dr. Burnham, it's very loud, when you talked about the future growth of the school with students and cafeteria size, classroom size, and things like that, and the baseball diamonds, I do a lot of thinking about future land needs, and so I just wanted to ask about, in terms of if you expanded to the maximum students you talked about, just to keep in mind parking and egresses, because even with the current students in the middle high school now, if you come at pickup time, you might end up out on Mass Ave for a little while waiting to take a left. And so I think the traffic congestion and the parking needs of the staff and the parents, they're already not met with, especially the primary building. And so if you maximized all those classrooms to all those numbers of children, I always like to throw out the land needs that are associated with growth, and just not seeing that as part of it is the reason I bring it up, because I think that becomes a real constraint on the use of these spaces. So I don't know if
Sure.
it's a question, more of a comment or concern.
So as an example, on this particular campus, the middle high school, if there were additional staff hired to address an increase in enrollment and we needed additional staff parking, likely we would have to reduce the number of students that get parking passes to park in the student lot to accommodate the staff. And I recently have been spending a lot of time out in the morning at drop-off time, and there are many buses that roll into the parking lot largely empty. So certainly, if students didn't have the capability to park on campus, drive to school, we could certainly accommodate them on the buses. But yeah, we're definitely going to take a look at all of that. I know that relative to the primary school campus as an example, the current width of the drive in to the school is relatively narrow, and when we have parents parking, oftentimes on both sides of that driveway during an open house evening, let's say, it creates a really narrow space for a car to move through and reach the school. You think about that in terms of an emergency situation, and that becomes very problematic. So that is one of the things that, I have mentioned, have had some conversation with the chief, have had a different conversation with Mr. Londa, actually recently mentioned it to the town manager as well. So I think that, potentially we could be looking for grant opportunities to widen that drive in. We definitely know that the parking is also an issue. There's not a lot of flexibility on that particular site to put additional parking because we're constrained by wetlands, and so it would definitely be something that we'd end up having to give something up in order to get additional parking on that particular campus, as an example. And there's parking limited here at Turkey Hill as well. So yes, there are some challenges with traffic flow and parking, no doubt.
Trying to see who has the mics. I see Jim. You're just holding it. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions from any of the committees? No. Okay. Questions from the public. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you turn your mic on, please?
Express my thanks to the team for the presentations. They were very informative.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers. And again, if you can identify who it is that you'd like to.
It's fine. Thank you. I just flipped it, yeah. My name is Dave Rogers. I live at 82 Highland Street. The first question I have is, it's unfortunate that we couldn't broadcast this symposium live. There's not 50 people here, and I noticed that they're taping it, but it really would have been much better if we could have live streamed it, and that's unfortunate. And having said that, I would hope that the schedule for presenting this would be well advertised so that folks could get the benefit of this, because this is extremely important. I have a question. I have a bunch of questions, and I'm not going to belabor the point this evening, but I really am perplexed because the school committee, in their infinite wisdom, has said that you can only come and take up 3 minutes of their time. And I have questions that won't be on the docket or the agenda, so-called, and I'll be damned if I'm going to stay around till 10 o'clock at night. So my question is, how can I get these questions answered, but I'll start off with just one. The classroom capacity is 1,551 students per the addition of this page. And if you look at the enrollment projections, we're at 1617 in FY20. So what am I missing here?
Does that page include the high school? I believe that the slide only went to the Lunenburg Middle School.
It says Lunenburg High School total, Lunenburg Middle School total, Turkey Hill Elementary School total, and Lunenburg Primary School total.
Okay, those are the current class sizes?
No, this is the total. Well,
I'm not sure I'm addressing your question. So it's like, basically, I would think, Dr. Burnham, I don't know if you'd like to address that particular question, but it also sounds like you have a lot of school
I draw people's
questions.
attention to the enrollment projections, FY21 to FY23.
Okay,
And down at the bottom, there's total, and it says no pre-K, and it starts off at 1676 and goes to 1668 for FY23. The simple math, and unless I made a mistake, and if I did, I'd certainly would like to be corrected, is if you add up the classroom capacity, it's 1551. Well, I ask you to look at this particular enrollment sheet, and as I am, and it says at the high school, the Lunenburg High School total for FY19 is 449 students. I mean, here, let me show you this.
Sure. So again, the capacity slide at each building is really kind of limited to no major restructuring, repurposing of available space currently. And we could increase classroom space and increase class size to accommodate. If you're talking about increases here in this building, it gets trickier to have a hard and fast number for how many students we could accommodate at the high school level because of the nature of the scheduling of classes. But again, the administrative team has indicated that they feel that they could increase the capacity here at this building up to a total of 1,050 without making major adjustments to the use of the classroom space. So further accommodation could be made with some additional adjustment.
Okay, would you be kind enough to take a look at this projection and add it up and tell me the correlation between that number and the classroom capacity that I added up to 1551?
Right.
If you,
Well,
chart that you're looking at, it has three capacities. It has the primary school, the elementary school, and the middle school. There is no listing for the high school because the superintendent said there was no way for her to estimate class sizes because of the nature of the scheduling. So that whole high school wing is not even in that calculation on that slide.
okay. I understand now. So back to my initial question. If we have questions, and I do, how do I present my questions at a school committee meeting without going over the 3-minute mark?
Well, I think if you have questions, you could certainly email me directly and I could get you answers.
But I'd like to have the benefit of a public forum so that people that might have similar questions can understand. I think it was very clear that you brought out that this is just you can ask a question. But this isn't a dialogue, okay? And this is crazy to me. How can we learn and interact if we don't have a dialogue? And I'm asking for a dialogue, no, from the superintendent and the school committee. How can I do this?
Okay, well, I can't speak for the school committee.
Right, so would they please respond?
I think that basically, right. I think that, okay, basically, if the questions are, if the questions are items that, I can't speak for the school committee. I can only speak for finance committee, so. Right. Right.
Well, I'm not going to take everybody's time tonight because,
But I also think that basically, I think that as Dr. Burnham said, at least sending her an email and starting from that, and then that could potentially lead to a presentation during school committee in terms of a public response to some of those questions. And then basically during the public comment phase of a school committee meeting, raising or basically addressing those issues. For tonight, I think basically what we were looking for as the finance committee was really to get a global sense of what's going on in town. And that was why we just set it up so it was just Q&A. Because basically we would like to potentially have discussions within our group to identify whether we want to have discussions between other groups and bring those people in. We'll certainly be addressing these issues within our own meetings, and certainly folks are welcome to attend those. Again, I can't speak for what the school committee does, and I won't.
I understand.
But for the purpose of this evening, but definitely if you have another question, go for it.
Well, I guess the question I will pose is this. When will there be an opportunity to expand upon that which we received this evening based upon questions that some folks this evening might have, and after they view it at home, they might have? I mean, I think that this has begun a whole bunch of dialogue issues here that we need to have, and I guess that's my concern.
Yeah, no, and I think it's an appropriate concern, and I think it was really the reason why we wanted to pull it together was to start to initiate those dialogues. And I think that basically if people are watching this on YouTube 3 weeks from tonight and you have questions that you think would be good to hear responses from the town manager, from the land use director, from the school superintendent, certainly everybody has a lunenburgonline.com email address. And I think that you're certainly welcome to send emails to any one of the members of the committees as well to bring those questions to the committees and to identify them as agenda items so that you know when to show up and discuss those further.
I guess what I'm saying is this is a good start.
Yes,
but it needs to.
Yes.
The other question I have is we heard what was presented this evening. When will we hear a projection similar to that which was presented this evening as it relates to finances? And I know that you were specific and said no finances, we're not talking about that, but this is a very, very intricate part of any kind of a projection that we come together with as a town, given especially the increase in personnel and all the needs that we have. So I think that's a critical part. And when can we expect that?
Right, basically in January, we'll be beginning the presentations as relates to the 5-year projections, as it relates to the budget itself. The the departments in town, as I understand it, have already started to look at what their current needs are for this year and next year. And I believe in February we start, and again, I'm going to put in another plug, we do have an empty seat on the Finance Committee. And we'll be more than happy to welcome somebody else to join us on those weekly meetings where we hear from all of the departments to address those specific issues. Again, from the Finance Committee perspective, what this evening was really all about was it's nice to have context and it's nice to have a global view before we do get into the minutia of, and those are important details, but it's nice to have a sense of, okay, so we're keeping this in mind while we're also understanding that this is coming down the pike as well. But the details in terms of the financial specifics and projections, January.
Well, you really didn't answer my question because I understand about the budget process and how that sorts out. What I'm looking for is we've got projections here that go out 5 years, and I think but beyond 5 years, it's crazy to try to project because it just is my own personal view.
Sure.
So I guess what I'm looking for is a 5-year projection given some kind of estimate, reasonable, for income and expenses so that we can see what the effects are going to be financially before we start implementing any kind of, quote, increases in needs.
Sure. And I guess I'll, and maybe I'm not hitting it, and maybe but basically when the 5-year forecast is presented, that's really where that will come up for discussion. And again, that's the beginning of the, that happens just before the budgets start.
Okay.
So again, in January, again, we serve cookies when that's presented. So we're just trying to get people to come and have these discussions and have this dialogue and raise questions that we're not thinking of, because there are some, obviously. And again, I would just invite people to do that. But we're looking at, as of right now, we're not projecting, we're not doing anything without the 5-year forecast at this point. And again, that comes in January. So I don't know if that addresses your question.
Well, kind of, sort of, but an integral part of this thing, and I'm not going to get into it for obvious reasons, is we've got some facilities issues that have to be decided.
Absolutely.
Because we can't begin to understand the financial consequences of actions unless we understand what direction we're going in.
Absolutely.
And marrying that with projected revenue and expenses and the whole 9 yards would give us a much better thing. So, as I
Absolutely.
said, this is a good start, but folks, we are a long way from Tipperary.
Absolutely. I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from anybody in the public? Questions from anybody on any of the committees? Katie?
Oh, okay. I guess it's for the school committee or the superintendent. And I just started doing numbers when Dave was talking. And when you do take out the high school, which is harder to understand, the current enrollment numbers, like for fiscal year 20, 1,157, they're not far off from the current capacity. That's like for 1,267 students. It's a little over 100 difference. And when I look at something like Turkey Hill Elementary School, where 25 kids per class, which is large, at the 15 classrooms, going from 15 classrooms to 7 classrooms. And I know I've seen breakdown of the additional space. Would that space be available without extensive renovations? Like all these additional classrooms that could potentially be there, how is that linked to renovation? And then I guess I just have a hard time understanding the analysis of the plenty of space being available when currently the ACE program, the extended day program, the School Link services, the need for fields and the early learning center and parking shortages all exist. Most of everything I just listed, including some parking, takes place over at the TCP parcel. If all those things are already outside of the buildings, how can we say there's plenty of space in them when we've already started leaving them? I guess I don't connect those
So
dots.
I guess I don't agree maybe with the need for the parking right this minute, but I can address the Turkey Hill. Yes, there are classroom spaces that with very little effort could be returned to classroom space at the Turkey Hill.
So I guess to be more clear, like a more basic question would be, if there's room in the primary building, why are things already off-site?
Because of the nature of the programming. So we wouldn't typically want to put 18 to 22-year-olds in our ACE program in our elementary school. To have them in a space that is separate because they are learning to transition to being independent in the community, having them in a separate space, not in an elementary school, it is preferable.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the ACE program is currently with the Extended Day and Learning Center in the same building?
And they aren't there at the same time. So the Early Learning Center is on one side of the building, ACE is on another side of the building, and when the Extended Day students are in the building, ACE is not in the building.
So the Early Learning Center is not during the day?
The Early Learning Center is during the day on the other side of the building.
And both of these programs that we're talking about are in the TCP. So I guess my question is, if there's a lot of space available in the school's current buildings, why are programs off-site?
So again, the program for the 18 to 22-year-olds, we feel it's not appropriate to house them where we have the available space in the elementary building. And as far as the extended day programming, we had so many students in the program, it was no longer optimal to house them in a cafeteria. Having them at TCP in multiple classrooms with different designations in each classroom provides a better option for programming. As an example, you know, they have a foosball table and they have other things that they couldn't have in a cafeteria. So to move them where there was available space, it makes more sense programmatically for them to have a better experience with activities after school, right? To house them in a cafeteria, 80 students at the primary school in the cafeteria, not optimal. So that move was made not because we required space, but because there was space available that allowed us to return the extended day to an extended day program versus checking kids into the cafeteria for 2 hours after school, right? If TCP were not available, we would have to return the extended day back to a building-based model. But honestly, I'm still not comfortable with 80 kindergarten first and second graders in a cafeteria for 2 hours. It's not optimal. It really is not. So if we're at some point having to move out of TCP, we're going to have to re-engage in a conversation about potentially reducing the enrollment and having it building-based again. Nothing that I have a plan for at the moment. The kids seem to be very happy back at TCP in the classroom space. But it's not, again, that program really has nothing to do with classroom availability during the school day. It really is the before school and after school. And quite honestly, I'm not going to put 80 primary school students in classrooms where the teachers have their classrooms prepared and ready for the next day. Things go missing, things get broken, things are moved. Teachers are now coming in the morning not ready to go. That's not an option in my mind.
Now,
So-
how about the Early Learning Center? That's more of a preschool program. Is there any chance that would go back on site in the school?
Potentially.
Or was there not room
We
for
were,
it?
we were concerned that based on last year's increase in kindergarten enrollment, that if we were to have seen that again for this year, we were going to need a classroom. Where the director of the extended day program is also running the Early Learning Center and where extended day was coming back to TCP, it made sense that the Early Learning Center also came back to TCP. We had available space if we needed it. If we had to hire a 7th kindergarten teacher, we would have had a class space ready, available to go. But that could go right back to the primary school if needed. Currently, we have space. However, next year, we know that that large first grade class is going to become a large second grade class. So we're going to need the 6th second grade teacher next year. Again, I'm going to need a classroom next year. So could we move everything that's currently at TCP into space that we have at Turkey Hill? Yep. But with that bubble class coming up, it's going to be at Turkey Hill in 2 years.
I know the bubble. I've got an Emily in it.
We're going to need that classroom space at Turkey Hill. So these are things that we're looking at, the pros and cons of, moving different programs and whatnot. But, the 18 to 22-year-old program, it's not ideal to put them with elementary students or primary school students. And honestly, they've graduated from the high school, so to keep them in the high school, it's almost like they didn't graduate from the high school. This really does take them away from the school setting, puts them in a different setting where their program is more independent, if you will.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and I didn't mean to have any of my question misunderstood. I think the schools need TC Paseos as part of the school campus in the schools, so that's more where my question was headed.
Sure, and I think, you know, as part of the conversation, and I remember that we had a joint meeting a year ago with the Board of Selectmen and the school committee, and we talked about the possibility of the unspoken for a couple of classrooms, right, not needed for office space, potentially being renovated, because it would allow us a little bit of flexibility. If we needed additional space at the primary school, we could move the preschool out of the primary school to free up classrooms and relocate the preschool to an early learning center located at TCP, if need be. But again,
And what's the school's point of view on combining town hall with schools in terms of query checks and safety? I have a huge concern with expanding the school into a space that the town's going to create that's open to the public. I don't understand how those will
That one might-
jive.
That one might be for a different venue.
I don't think
that's
so.
more
I think
planning.
it's all part
That's-
of the big plan, because if we're talking
No,
about
I
spaces...
understand. Yeah, no, I-
And we're talking about concurrent
No,
uses that aren't...
It's important. I'm not trying to say it's not important. I'm just saying, given the setup of the venue tonight, I think to get into the specific planning around a specific site, while it needs to be discussed, I don't disagree. I just basically want to go with we're talking about, yeah, we're seeing the numbers come. What's that going to mean? There will be spaces needed. We've got Turkey Hill to look at in the next couple of years. And with the planning around the Paseos design starting to come up, I'm going to assume that there'll be discussion around that, bringing the school committee in to that discussion, rather than putting Dr. Burnham on the spot tonight, because basically what I asked her to present had much more to do with what are the numbers. But I do think it's a valuable discussion to have.
And with all due respect, we're talking about space needs, and these are space need questions. So we won't get to the place where we're solving problems if we don't talk about them.
No, I understand. Again, it's like, I think it's important, and I think it's definitely a discussion that needs to be had. But what I'd like to do at this point is, if there's no other questions, which there don't seem to be, then I would certainly welcome all of the committees to adjourn if they so choose. If you would like to continue to meet, you're welcome to do that. The Finance Committee, do I have anybody who wants to? Okay. Then at least we're adjourned. Again, thank you to the speakers for tonight, and hopefully we didn't keep you out too late. But thank you.